If you've been following along in the Christmas story, you might be feeling a little bit of whiplash right now. When we last left off with Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, it was a beautiful, silent night. All was calm. All was bright. And now suddenly we are confronted with a madman murdering children. 1 minute we're in the land of Elf and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The next, we're back to reality. When Herod's plot to murder Jesus fails, he kills every child under the age of 2 in the entire Bethlehem area. I know we want to rest in the joy of the Christmas season, but how can we not hear this story and not have our minds wander to the ugly reality around us? How can we not think of children from war-torn places like Syria or Yemen? How can we not think of Sandy Hook? How can we not think of the children in concentration camps on our southern border, or children like Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown? The children whose future is under threat because of a climate crisis, or the refugees like Jesus, and yes, Jesus was a refugee, who are fleeing violence and persecution. How can we not think of all the ways that the next generation is made to suffer for the sins of their mothers and fathers? Just reading this text makes me want to go running like crazy back to Silent Night, Holy Night. But of course, as Pastor Mimi reminded us on Christmas Eve, Silent Night was anything but. There is nothing calm and quiet about the birth of a child. And the land of Israel at Jesus' birth was anything but peaceful. When we zoom out far enough, it becomes clear that our tidy, sentimental version of Christmas is what is actually out of place. In the holiday world of television commercials and Christmas specials, there's no problem that Christmas can't solve. Frayed relationship? Bake some cookies and wait for the magic of Christmas. Student loans and healthcare costs got you down? Well, throw some decorations up and wait for a little holiday cheer. Unhappy kid? Difficult parent? Distant partner? There's nothing that the perfect gift can't solve. So what if it's all a bit plastic and fake? So what if we know we're falling for a mirage that helps big companies sell us stuff? We go along with it because it makes us feel like we're on top of things, like we're in control even when our lives are a hot mess. And we love being in control. That's the whole dream of modern life. To throw off the shackles of history and tradition and make your life your own. There's beauty in it even, especially when it means more freedom and more dignity for more people around the globe. But being in control also quickly becomes an idol. It becomes something we cannot live without. I suspect all of us dislike that feeling of things unraveling around us. We feel threatened when it feels like something in our life is spinning off in 1,000 directions despite our best efforts to hold it together. All of us get that fight or flight response when it feels like someone else is deciding our destiny. We admire people who seem in control all the time, and we use the words out of control as an insult. And yet, when we read this story, it's rather disturbing to realize who is most focused on staying in control. The wise men, they just set out following a star. They don't know where it leads. It leads them to Jerusalem and then to Bethlehem, and when they get there, God warns them in a dream not to return to Herod, and they don't. These wise men don't seem so in control of their own destiny. Joseph and Mary already ended up with a surprise son. Then God warns them in a dream to flee to Egypt, and they pack up and go. Years later, God once again appears to them in a dream, and they return to Israel. What about Jesus? What about God of creation, God of all beginnings and endings, Alpha and Omega, eternal Word? This eternal Word becomes a fragile, needy newborn, vulnerable before men armed with sharp steel. No one is more out of control than a small child. If you're unsure, you've forgotten, we have plenty of new parents in the congregation who will be happy to remind you of this fact. It actually feels in this story like the only one who's in control, the only person who's actually worried about being in control, the only person willing to do anything to stay in control is Herod. And that's more than a little bit uncomfortable. Because suddenly Herod, this man whose murder reminds us of everything we lament in our world today, Herod is the person most like us. Now, I know most of you pretty well. I'm pretty confident none of you is a half-crazed king about to go on a murder spree. But if we're honest, we all have these moments where it feels like what little power we have is slipping away, and we hate it. It's so easy for us to see Herod as an enemy. It's so easy for us to heap scorn on all his helpers and lackeys in Jerusalem. It's so easy to forget that Jesus teaches us to love our enemies. And that probably means that 30 years later, someone came up to him and said, "Even Herod?" And it probably means that Jesus said, "Yeah, even Herod." We struggle to draw a line between the awful things that people do and their core, the person that God created and God loves. And we struggle until we realize that we're a lot more like Herod than we like to admit. Like Herod, we suddenly discover that God is here and now in this world in ways we can't explain. We encounter mystery with a capital M, something beyond comprehension. There are these rare, fleeting moments in still quiet or even in hectic traffic. Time slows down and we become fully alive and aware. And we're not thinking or doing, we're just being. And we stumble upon something beautiful and whole and holy that lies underneath all these fragments that we experience as our life. In these moments, we realize that God is at work in ways that we cannot understand. We have the same realization that Herod did. Herod encountered mystery, and to put it in highly technical terms, he freaked out. The question for us is, when we encounter mystery, how will we respond? One option is to reject the idea altogether. We can declare for all to hear that it is a material world and we are just material girls and boys. Problem is, we will never stop searching for God, whether we admit it or not. We always keep looking for that elusive sense of meaning and belonging. Psychologist and contemplative Christian Gerald May writes, "As a society, we are convinced that if we can only learn enough, become strong enough, and work hard enough, we can impose peace and fulfillment upon ourselves and everyone else. But the actual condition of the world and of our own hearts refutes this. Something else is needed, some source of inspiration, some reservoir of power and wisdom beyond that which is provided by our personal wills. We need something that can balance willfulness with willingness, something that can temper our harshness with love." So, if rejecting the idea of mystery won't work, we can try the most common response, which is just attempting to reassert control. This is where a lot of the worst of human behavior shows up. It's actually kind of ironic. Most of the time when people say they're trying to be in control of their own lives, what they mean is they are rejecting somebody else who's trying to control theirs in their own desperate attempt to avoid mystery. They're trying to escape from a church or a parent or a custom or a tradition or a system in society that sacrifices human dignity for the sake of keeping control. Toni Morrison once wrote, "Definitions belong to the definers, not to the defined." It makes us feel powerful to be able to define things as right or wrong. It makes us feel a little bit less like God's creatures and a little bit more like little gods ourselves. Little gods with the knowledge of good and evil. It makes us feel like we're in control. It leads to the worst of religion. We get stuck on a particular belief or rule and we say that this is what true religion looks like. We create a tiny box and we lock God inside it and we declare everything outside wrong and evil. And the result is conflict and accusation and hate. And you see this same trend not just in Christianity, but in every religious tradition. So, if rejection and control don't work, I guess the only option left is to embrace it. Embrace the sense of wonder and mystery and the feeling of being called to something. Acknowledge that Jesus actually died on a cross surrounded by a whole mob of people who felt like they were in total control. Embrace the fact that God's love for you does not depend on you doing or saying the right things. Embrace grace. Now, I'm not talking about a blind obedience. We can always ask questions of God. We should always look in the mirror and ask whether we're living up to the standard of God's creation of love and justice. But at the end of the day, we do follow a God who triumphed by giving up power, even to the point of death on a cross. It sounds straightforward, embrace mystery, but it's not. It's why as soon as we start to pray, thoughts pop up in our head. Our brain turns to all the little things we need to do, all the things we start worrying about. That's why it's really easy to pray when we're in a bad place and really hard to remember to pray when life is going great. Worrying about stuff makes us feel like we're doing something about it. It's like something deep inside us flinches away from losing that sense of consciousness, of autonomy, of control. John of the Cross says, "In order to have everything, desire to have nothing." So we can try to surrender, we can try to pray. There may be no amount of trying that will ever get us to God, but that's what grace is for. Grace is God reaching out across that last little gap, that last chasm, and grabbing our hand and saying, "Hold on, I've got you." It is the time of year to make New Year's resolutions, to come up with something new to commit ourselves to. And it's a beautiful opportunity to make a fresh start. It's also a deceptively tricky way of reasserting control over our lives. Most New Year's resolutions, I suspect, are about picking something that feels a little off kilter and saying, "I'm going to get new control over that." But what if our New Year's resolution was to do less? What if we resolve to surrender a little bit to God? Even if that's uncomfortable. Especially if that's uncomfortable. What would that look like? What if you resolve to spend 20 minutes a day just sitting silently with God? What if you resolve to listen to that little voice in your heart and pursue a dream you always told yourself was impossible or not for you? What if you resolve to speak a little bit less and listen a little bit more? Or to spend quality time with family without any distractions? Or to never look at your phone when you're talking to somebody? Or to take a hard look at all the parts in your life that feel out of control and just sit with it and not try to fix it? What if you resolved to do nothing for a little while? When was the last time you just felt bored? Maybe when you give up trying to be in control, you'll notice all the little signs of God's grace in your life. Mystery is here in the world. That is what we celebrate at Christmas time. The love of God in Jesus Christ is reaching out to you in every moment. How will you respond?